"Sorry, ma'am. Did I get in your way? My bad." Irene Solis said nothing. She picked up the scattered napkins from the tile floor, the ones that had spilled when the cart clipped her hip, and placed them back in the dispenser with the same unhurried care she used for everything. The young woman who had knocked into her was already walking away, already laughing with someone on her phone. The dishwasher at the end of the line gave Irene a look. She shook her head once. Not worth it. She pushed her linen cart toward the service elevator and pressed the button for the fourth floor, the one the guests never used. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who had no idea what your hands had built? Irene Solis was 53 years old and had worked the housekeeping floor at the Hargrove Grand Hotel in downtown Nashville for 11 years. She arrived at 5:45 every morning, which was 15 minutes before her shift started and 45 minutes before the lobby filled with noise. She liked the hotel before the noise. She liked the way the chandeliers hummed when no one was beneath them. She moved through guest rooms with a precision that the other housekeepers had stopped questioning and started quietly studying. She could strip a king bed, reset it to inspection standard, and have the pillows aligned in under 6 minutes. She knew which rooms held the guests who left wet towels on the carpet and which ones folded them neatly over the rack out of what she suspected was guilt. She knew the smell of a minibar that had been raided after midnight versus one that had been opened at noon. She knew, without looking at the booking sheet, which rooms would check out late. Small details told her large things. She noticed everything and mentioned none of it. She was lean and quiet. With silver threaded through dark hair, she pinned up every morning without a mirror. Her hands were calloused at the knuckles and steady at the wrist. When a ceramic soap dish shattered in room 412 one February morning, her hand had caught 2 of the 3 pieces before they reached the tile. The guest had laughed and called it a lucky grab. Irene had agreed with him because it was easier than explaining. She lived in a rented duplex on the east side of Nashville with a small garden out back that she kept in a way that made her neighbors slow their cars when they passed it. Inside, the shelves were spare. A few framed photographs, most of them turned at angles that made them hard to see from the doorway. A single bookshelf, organized by subject, not author. And in the hall closet behind the winter coats, a cardboard box sealed with brown tape and labeled in her handwriting, "Do not." She had not opened it in 8 years. Some nights she sat at the kitchen table with her coffee going cold and her hands folded, and she did not read, did not watch anything, just listened to the duplex settle around her. She seemed to be waiting for something, but if you asked her what, she would tell you she was just resting. Nobody asked. Miles Langford had come to the Hargrove Grand the way money always arrives, with noise and expectation and a very good-looking bag. 26 years old, the son of Preston Langford of Langford Capital, which had recently acquired the hotel group that owned the Hargrove among 17 others. Miles had been given the title of Regional Brand Ambassador, which was a title that had not existed before him and would not survive after him, but which came with a corner suite on the 8th floor and a standing reservation at the hotel restaurant. He was not without talent. He had a memory for names, a handshake like a door closing properly, and an instinct for the moment when a room was paying attention to him. The talent was real. The problem, as with most talent given too much altitude too soon, was that he had confused being watched with being right. His father had 2 rules for the hotel properties. Keep the reviews above 4.7 and keep the costs below projection. Miles had a 3rd rule that he had added himself. Make sure everyone in the building knew which family owned it. Sandra Cho managed the front desk and had worked at the Hargrove for 9 years. She had survived 4 different general managers and 1 hurricane evacuation and had the organizational memory of a person who has had to be right too many times to afford being wrong. She liked Irene. Irene remembered which guests had dietary restrictions and left notes in the cleaning log that had twice saved Sandra from a genuine complaint situation. Irene also brought Sandra coffee on Tuesdays without being asked, which Sandra had come to think of as load-bearing. One Wednesday afternoon, Sandra watched from the desk as a hotel guest's 7-year-old daughter stood in the lobby with a broken wheel on her rolling carry-on, crying quietly in the way children cry when they are trying not to be seen doing it. The girl's mother was at the check-in counter, deep in a conversation about a billing discrepancy. The bellhops were busy. Nobody else seemed to notice. Irene was crossing the lobby with a stack of folded towels. She paused. She set the towels down on a luggage cart, knelt beside the girl without a word, turned the suitcase upside down, pressed the wheel mechanism twice with her thumb, and snapped it back into alignment. She set the bag upright, gave it a test roll on the marble, and handed the handle back to the child. Then she picked up her towels and kept walking. The girl stared at her suitcase like it had done something miraculous. Sandra stood at the desk with a phone to her ear, not listening to it. For the first time in 11 years, someone asked the question that would eventually unravel everything. One of the bellhops turned to Sandra and said, "Where did she learn to do that?" Sandra had no answer for him. She filed the question away and went back to work. Miles Langford arrived on a Thursday with a guest list and a purpose. He was hosting a brand weekend, which meant 32 influencers with a combined reach of 11 million followers were being installed in the hotel's best rooms for 3 days to produce content that would, in his words, make the Hargrove feel like the only hotel that matters. The lobby had been dressed with additional lighting rigs and 2 photographers. The pool had been restaged, the restaurant menu had been adjusted for color, and Miles had decided, somewhere between the airport and the hotel, that the housekeeping staff needed to be less visible during the filming hours. He had communicated this to the general manager, David Park, as a suggestion. David Park understood it as something more binding than that. What happened next was caught on 3 separate phones and the hotel's own security cameras. Miles was walking a group of influencers through the 4th-floor corridor, explaining some detail about the thread count on the bedding when Irene came out of room 418 with a laundry bag. The corridor was narrow. Irene pulled the bag to the wall to let the group pass. Miles stopped. He looked at her, then at the group, then back at her. "Could you?" he said, and he made a small shooing gesture with 2 fingers, the kind you might make at a dog that has wandered somewhere inconvenient. Irene looked at the gesture. Then she looked at him. "I know what you do here," Miles said. "I'm saying the service areas are down the other hall." He was smiling when he said it, the way people smile when they are being cruel and want credit for keeping it pleasant. "This is my floor," Irene said. "It has been for 11 years. Miles turned to the group, spread his hands slightly, and laughed. "Old habits, right?" He looked back at Irene. "Humor me. Just for the weekend." Irene said nothing for a moment. Then she picked up the laundry bag and walked down the hall the way she had come. One of the influencers posted it 6 hours later. The caption read, "Even the staff gets a vibe check here. Lol." It had 30,000 views by midnight. Miles reposted it to his own story with a laughing emoji. Sandra saw it from the front desk and made a decision she would not fully understand until later. Before she went home that night, she accessed the hotel's cloud storage and copied the 4th-floor corridor footage to her personal drive. She did not know exactly why. She just felt, with the particular instinct of someone who has watched institutions fail the people they owe, that somebody should keep a copy. The weekend continued. Miles found new material. On Friday morning, he filmed Irene in the service elevator without her knowledge, commenting to camera about how the hotel was committed to keeping the, quote, operational reality behind the scenes. The clip got 47,000 views and a trending tag. On Saturday, he staged a bit where he asked her to explain the hotel's brand values to a group of laughing guests. She answered him simply and without expression, which somehow made it funnier to the people filming it. David Park saw all of it. He also saw the weekend's content numbers climbing. He told his assistant he would address the situation on Monday. On Monday, he did not address the situation. Sandra went to him twice. Twice he said that the Langford family relationship was delicate and that Irene seemed to be handling things fine. That part was true. Irene had not complained, but Sandra had started keeping a second folder on her desktop, quietly, the way you do when you already know how a thing ends and you want to have something ready. Thursday evening, Irene sat in her car in the hotel parking structure for 20 minutes before she could make herself drive. She was not crying. She had stopped crying about things like this a long time ago, in rooms that no one knew about. In a year she did not discuss. She was just tired in the particular way you get tired when you are very good at something, and the place you do it has decided you are invisible. She drove home. She sat at the kitchen table. After a while, she went to the hall closet, pushed the coats aside, and brought the sealed cardboard box to the table. She set her hands flat on the tape. She did not open it. She just sat with it for a long time, like a conversation she was not ready to have yet. Miles posted a poll to his story on Friday night. Should the housekeeping lady get her own content segment? 79,000 people voted. 68% said yes. Miles stared at the number with something he told himself was amusement and tried not to examine the part of it that felt like unease. The brand weekend ended. The influencers checked out. The content numbers were excellent. Miles stayed on in his 8th-floor suite and called it a working visit. On Monday morning, he arrived at the hotel restaurant for breakfast and found Irene resetting the tables in the private dining room adjacent to it. The door was open. He had his phone out. "Hey," he said, leaning in the doorway. "You want to be in a video?" Irene straightened a place setting and said nothing. "Come on, you're basically famous now. Just say something about the hotel." "I don't do testimonials," Irene said. Miles laughed. "Why not? Afraid you'll go viral?" She looked at him then, directly and without performance. "You should move along," she said. "Your eggs are getting cold." The restaurant staff within earshot went carefully still. Miles stepped into the doorway fully. "Let me ask you something. What exactly do you think you're doing here?" "I'm setting tables," she said. "What are you doing here?" The room held its breath. Miles's expression shifted through several things before it landed on something that looked like a decision. He filmed the moment and posted it with the caption, "When the help forgets their place." It crossed 100,000 views before noon. By Tuesday, his father had heard about the numbers. Preston Langford called the general manager and said, in the way men like Preston say things, that the Irene situation was becoming a liability. David Park understood. He called Irene into his office that afternoon with an envelope and a practiced expression. "Restructuring," he said. "Nothing personal." The housekeeping department was being reorganized, and her position was, he searched for the word, consolidated. She would receive 4 weeks of severance. Her pension, he added carefully, was under review due to some administrative questions about her employment classification that the Langford legal team had identified. Those questions could be resolved, he said, if she was willing to record a brief statement clarifying that the corridor incident had been a misunderstanding. Just a few sentences, that she had not been uncomfortable, that Miles Langford had been courteous. Irene looked at the envelope for a long moment. 11 years, she said. I never missed a shift. David Park looked at his desk. You tell them, she said. My knees don't bend that direction. She left the envelope on his desk and walked out. David Park sat there, holding her severance like a man who has just realized he is the villain in a story he thought he was observing. Not everyone believed the version Miles was telling. A guest in room 421 who had witnessed the corridor incident posted a detailed account on a travel forum. A food writer who had been at the restaurant on Monday described what she had seen with enough specificity to make the reposting cycle awkward. Their accounts gathered hundreds of responses. Against the 1 million views Miles had accumulated, hundreds was not a meaningful number. Sandra was called into David Park's office on Wednesday. The hotel's legal team had become involved, she was told. Standard practice when there was any question of on-property footage. The security retention protocol was being reviewed. 30-day deletion cycles needed to be confirmed. Sandra understood. Of course, she said. That night, she made 2 more copies of the corridor footage and the private dining room footage and the service elevator footage and put one in her glove compartment and mailed one to her sister in Memphis. The formal complaint arrived 10 days later, routed through the Langford Capital Legal Office. Irene Solis, the filing claimed, had created a hostile environment for a visiting executive through a pattern of insubordinate behavior, had made statements on hotel property calculated to embarrass the Langford brand, and had, in one instance, physically blocked a walkway, causing a guest to be delayed. Damages sought were $600,000. Irene read the complaint at her kitchen table on a Saturday morning. She read it twice and then set it next to her coffee cup and her utility bill and the letter from the pension administrator saying her benefits were under administrative review. The math was simple and merciless. Lawyers cost more than housekeepers make. Even winning would cost her the years she'd spent saving not to have to work forever. She went to the hall closet that night. She took down the box. She brought it to the table. She sat for a long time. Then, for the first time in 8 years, she broke the tape. Inside was a portfolio, thick, cream-colored, with a cover that read, Irene Solis, Executive Pastry Chef, Press and Professional Archive. Beneath it, a photograph, younger version of her face, white chef's coat, standing behind a competition table at what the banner behind her identified as the James Beard Foundation Awards, 2009. She was holding a plaque. 2 people flanked her, both in white coats, both grinning. She was not grinning. She was looking at the camera with the same expression she used for everything, like she had already moved on to the next problem. Beneath the photograph, press clippings, a food and wine feature, a New York Times dining section profile, an industry newsletter with her face on the cover and a headline that read, The Quiet Revolution at Table 12. And beneath all of it, a small notebook, water-damaged at the corner, filled margin to margin with recipes and handwriting so small you needed good light to read it. She had not looked at any of it in 8 years. She touched none of it now. She just looked. Then she closed the box, retaped it without the doughnut, and went to bed. That night, 2 cars pulled into her driveway. Then a third. She heard doors close. Careful, unhurried. She was 53 years old, fired, facing a $600,000 lawsuit, and she had no idea who would knock on her door at 9 at night. The knock, when it came, was quiet, almost apologetic. She opened the door. 3 people stood on her porch in the October dark. Andre Thibault, who was now the executive chef at one of 4 restaurants he owned in Chicago, still had the same way of standing that he'd had at 22. Like he was permanently about to roll up his sleeves. Beside him, Clara Reyes, who had a James Beard Award of her own now and ran a culinary school in Austin with her name on the building. And next to Clara, holding a paper coffee cup and looking at Irene with the expression of a person who has been planning this moment for 2 weeks, was Jin Park, who had spent 3 years as her apprentice and was now the consulting chef for a hotel group with 40 properties on 3 continents. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Clara stepped forward and put her arms around Irene, so hard the porch light swayed. You stopped answering my emails, she said into Irene's shoulder. You stopped sending ones I knew how to answer, Irene said. They sat in her kitchen until midnight. Andre had driven down from Chicago the day the complaint was filed and called the other 2 from the road. Jin had been in Singapore and had gotten on a plane. Irene tried twice to tell them she would handle it. Andre set down his coffee. Chef, you taught us one thing before anything else. You said the best kitchens don't leave their people on the line alone. He looked at her. You're still on the line. Irene looked at the 3 of them. 3 people she had found when they were nobody and built into something lasting. And for the first time in 8 years, she didn't have an answer that sent them away. The hearing was held in a conference room at the Davidson County Courthouse, with cameras in the hallway and a local reporter who had gotten wind of the filing and knew she had something. Preston Langford sat behind his attorney, a woman named Candace Voss, who had a record of turning civil complaints into narrative and narrative into settlements. Miles sat beside his father in a jacket that cost more than Irene's monthly rent, eyes on the table. Irene came alone. She sat with her hands folded and represented herself because she had $400 left in her checking account and a pension in administrative purgatory. Candace Voss worked the room precisely. She played the corridor footage, the version Miles had posted. She used the phrase pattern of disruption 4 times. She produced a statement from David Park about Irene's insubordinate conduct. She noted that the hotel had received 17 complaints about the housekeeping department in Irene's final quarter. A figure she did not clarify had nothing to do with Irene personally. "Miss Solis," she said, turning. "You worked as a hotel housekeeper for 11 years. Yes, Irene said. Before that, Voss said, no hospitality experience on record. Irene said nothing. No employment history from 2006 to 2013. A gap, Irene said. A 7-year gap. People have those, Irene said. For reasons. Voss smiled at the room. The implication sat there, clean and useful. She had not lied. She had simply arranged the silence into a shape that served her. "Miss Solis," she continued, "you made statements on hotel property to a visiting executive that were, by multiple witness accounts, designed to embarrass him." "I answered his questions," Irene said. "You suggested he was unwelcome in a space he had every right to occupy." "I suggested his eggs were getting cold." A murmur moved through the room. The judge, a measured woman named Patricia Harlow, looked up from her notes for the first time. Voss pressed on. "Can you explain why a woman with no culinary credentials was correcting the placement of settings in a fine dining room?" The room went quiet in a particular way. Irene looked at the table. Her hands, which had been still the entire morning, tightened once. Then she looked up. The hearing officer waited. Irene opened her mouth and then closed it. Some things don't open in a room full of people who have already decided who you are. Voss let the silence breathe and turned back to her notes with a small, satisfied movement. That was when the door at the back of the room opened. Andre Thibault walked up the center aisle in a chef's coat, not for theater. He had come from a morning service and had not changed. Half the people in the room had seen his face on a magazine cover. The other half recognized him anyway, the way you recognize authority when it enters a room slowly. He asked to speak as a character witness. Judge Harlow, who had been watching the proceedings with an expression of careful neutrality, allowed it. Andre raised his right hand and looked at the press row when he spoke. "My name is Andre Thibault. The woman you've been calling a disruptive employee is Irene Solis. We called her chef. She is the reason I have 4 restaurants. She is the reason Clara Reyes has a school. She is the reason Jin Park can walk into any hotel kitchen in the world and be taken seriously in 10 minutes. He paused. "Stand up, please." 2 people rose in the gallery. "Clara Reyes," he said. James Beard Award, Best Chef Southwest 2019. 3 cookbooks. Named one of the 50 most influential women in American food by Bon Appetit. Jin Park, consulting chef for the Pacific Rim division of Meridian Hotels. Opened 14 restaurant concepts across Asia and Australia in the last 6 years. Voss was on her feet objecting to relevance. Judge Harlow looked at her over her glasses. "Counselor, you spent 30 minutes arguing this woman has no culinary background or expertise." Her culinary background just stood up. Overruled. "You asked why there's a 7-year gap," Andre said, and his voice dropped. "I'll answer it, because she never will." Irene went still at the table. From 2001 to 2006, Irene Solis was the executive pastry chef at Maison Carré in New York City. She trained under Michel Renard. She won the James Beard Rising Star Award in 2003. In 2005, Food & Wine named her one of the 10 most important pastry chefs working in America. He stopped, looked at his hands. In 2006, her daughter Sophia was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. She was 29 years old. Irene left her career to care for her full-time. For 7 years, she sold her apartment. She turned down every offer. She was there every day until Sophia died in 2013. Irene did not look up from the table, but her shoulders, which had been set like load-bearing walls for 11 years, dropped one slow inch. A reporter in the second row pressed her sleeve against her eyes. She didn't leave the industry because she failed, Andre said. She left because she loved someone more than she loved any kitchen. And then she came back in the only way she could manage at the time. Quietly, without asking the world to notice. Miles Langford stared at the back of Irene's head and felt the jacket on his shoulders become very heavy. Voss asked for a recess. Harlow gave her 10 minutes. Then Sandra Cho walked up the aisle. She had quit the Hargrove that morning by a resignation email she had spent 3 days writing and then deleted and rewritten in 4 minutes at midnight. She was carrying a silver hard drive in both hands. Under oath, she described the footage retention conversation with David Park. She described copying the files before they were deleted. She described in specific and time-stamped detail 11 days of hallway footage, elevator footage, restaurant footage, and the kind of full-angle security camera record that a phone held at face height cannot replicate. Judge Harlow ordered it played. The corridor uncut. Miles's two-finger dismissal. Irene's response. The service elevator footage he had recorded without her knowledge. The private dining room. The moment that Miles's own edited version had cropped to 12 seconds, played in full 4 minutes and 17 seconds of a man using his family's name as a weapon against a woman doing her job. And then, at the end of the restaurant footage, a detail that Voss's edited record had removed entirely. Miles stepping fully into Irene's workspace, placing himself between her and the door, and the way Irene had moved to the side with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that stillness is what keeps a situation from becoming something worse. When the footage stopped, no one spoke for 4 seconds. Harlow asked to see the elevator segment again. Voss requested a recess for the second time. The judge gave her 8 minutes. It took 5. When the room reconvened, Candace Voss stood with the expression of a woman calculating. "Your Honor," she said, "the plaintiff moves to withdraw the complaint with prejudice." Harlow removed her reading glasses. She looked at Preston Langford for a long moment without expression. "The court notes the withdrawal," she said. "The court also notes that the city attorney's office will have access to all submitted footage as a matter of record." She let that sit. Withdrawal granted. The gavel came down. The room began to move. Reporters toward the hallway. Preston already speaking into his phone. David Park, who had attended in the back row as an observer, was already not there anymore. Irene sat without moving. Clara's hand was on her shoulder, and then a chair scraped. Miles Langford stood up. He pulled at his jacket once, straightened it, and then took it off and set it over the back of his chair. He turned to face the room. He was not wearing a sling. He was not staging anything. He looked like a person who had not slept correctly in 2 weeks. He did not go to the front. He spoke from where he was standing. "Everything Mr. Thibault said is true. Everything Miss Cho showed you is true." He looked at the table for a moment. "I dismissed her because she worked housekeeping, and I thought people who worked housekeeping were furniture. I posted it because the numbers were good. I didn't ask her name once in 11 days. His voice broke on the next sentence, and he let it. "I looked up her daughter last night. Sophia Solis. There's a photograph of the two of them at a restaurant in the village, 2004. She's laughing at something her mom said. She looks exactly like someone who's going to be fine." He stopped. Then he turned to face Irene. "I chose this week because it was the week with the best content calendar. I didn't know anything about her. I still don't. But I know that the things I said about her are not true, and I said them in front of a lot of people, and I don't know how to undo that except to say it in front of the same people." He bowed his head. It was clumsy and unpracticed. A person bowing who has never needed to before. "I'm sorry," he said. "Miss Solis." Irene looked at him for a long, level moment. Some apologies need time before they're worth answering. She gave him none of her face and all of her attention, which is different. The consequences followed in their own order. Langford Capital's hotel group dropped Miles from his brand ambassador role within the week and released a statement that used the word values 5 times. Preston Langford did not release a statement. He did not need to. His partners had seen the footage and were already doing the math about what his name now attached to. 3 development partnerships in Nashville restructured quietly. The kind of quiet that is louder than noise. David Park resigned before the board could vote. He submitted his resignation on a Tuesday morning by email, and the hotel group did not contest it. Sandra Cho turned down 4 media interview requests and accepted a position with a legal nonprofit that worked on wage theft cases in the hospitality industry. She said later that it was the first job she had ever taken that felt like it had been waiting for her. The Hargrove Grand's board of directors convened an emergency session and voted to offer Irene the position of Director of Guest Experience Standards, a title that had not previously existed, with a salary that reflected 11 years of seniority she had never been paid for. Irene listened to the offer in David Park's old office, which still had his framed cost projections on the wall. "I'll consider it," she said. They waited. "On one condition," she added. "I want a culinary residency program in this hotel, open to anyone who works on property. Line cooks, dishwashers, housekeeping staff who want to cross-train. No fees. 4 times a year. The hotel covers the ingredients, and I cover the instruction." The board agreed before she finished. Irene looked at the wall where David Park's projections used to be. She thought of something. "It has a name," she said. "The Sophia Residency." Nobody in the room offered an alternate suggestion. The first session was held on a Thursday evening in November in the hotel kitchen after service. 14 people sat on stainless steel prep tables with cutting boards in their laps. The youngest was 19, a dishwasher named Tomas who had never held a chef's knife correctly. The oldest was a 61-year-old housekeeper named Bev, who had been baking for her church for 30 years and wanted to understand what she was already doing. Irene came in with a canvas bag of ingredients, no notes, and the portable photo she had taken from the hall closet and now kept in her locker. She set the photo on the windowsill where it faced the room. Sophia at 27, apron on, laughing at a counter in a kitchen that no longer existed. First lesson, Irene told them, her voice carrying in the way it had once carried across a full service at Maison Carré. "The most important thing you will learn in this room is how to taste something and tell the truth about it. Not what you think it should taste like. Not what the recipe says, what it actually is." 14 people leaned forward at the same moment. In the back, leaning in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, Clara Reyes watched her old chef work. "She's still perfect," Clara said quietly. Andre, beside her, did not answer. He was watching Irene's hands as she broke down a vanilla pod with the clean economy of someone who has done it 10,000 times and has not once gotten bored of getting it right. By spring, the Sophia Residency had a waiting list. By summer, it had a second location, in a hotel 2 hours north, opened by a phone call Irene had not made. Then a third, each one organized by a former participant who had learned something and felt the specific obligation of people who have been handed something real. Miles Langford was not at the first session. He was not at the second. He showed up at the third in October on a Tuesday night in plain clothes with no phone. He stood at the door of the hotel kitchen until one of the participants noticed him and turned, and then the room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the past walks in. He looked at Irene. She looked back at him. "Teach me," he said. "From the beginning. I'll start wherever you say." Irene held the look for a long moment. Then she turned and opened the cabinet under the prep station. "There's an apron in there," she said, "and a mop in the closet. The kitchen floor teaches you what you're working with before you start. That's lesson 1. Miles Langford, whose family name was on 4 hotels in 3 states, and whose follower count had dropped by 90%, and who had not posted anything in 4 months, opened the closet and took out the mop. Nobody laughed. The young man who had filmed an old woman being dismissed now moved a bucket across a kitchen floor in careful, even arcs, while the woman he had dismissed taught 15 people how to tell the truth about what they were tasting. On the windowsill, in the light, Sophia Solis smiled at something her mother had said. 6 months later, on a cold Thursday in April, the lights of the Hargrove Grand Kitchen burned warm and late. Through the pass-through window, you could see the residency in progress, 22 people now, in the lines that had started tentative in November and moved with confidence by March. Andre taught one Thursday a month and had started talking about opening a teaching kitchen in Nashville that could anchor the whole thing. Clara flew in twice a season and had put the residency in her school's curriculum as a field partnership. Jin had sent 3 of his consulting clients to it with a recommendation note that Irene kept in her locker next to Sophia's photograph. Miles Langford was there every week. He was easy to miss in the room now, which was something he was still adjusting to. He had asked the program not to feature him in anything. He had started tasting correctly, which meant he had started admitting when something was wrong, which is harder than it sounds. He was working on a compound butter that had given him trouble for a month. He brought it to Irene on a Tuesday and set it in front of her without speaking. She tasted it, was quiet for a moment, and then said, "The salt is right. The acid is 1 degree shy. You know what's missing?" He did know. He had known for 2 weeks and kept adding the wrong thing to avoid it. He nodded and went back to his station. Irene still arrived early. Not at 5:45 anymore. At 6:30, which was still 45 minutes before anyone else. She still read a room when she walked into it. She still folded everything in thirds. But the photograph by the windowsill faced out now, and she had started talking to it again during setup. Small things. How Tomas had finally found his knife grip. How Bev's choux pastry had been the best in the room on the second try. How the compound butter was almost there, she thought. If the young man would stop being afraid of the lemon. On the anniversary of Sophia's death, Irene did not hold a session. The kitchen stayed empty, the lights on, the prep tables cleared and clean. No one scheduled it. Everyone who knew what the date meant simply honored it. Tomas, who was 20 now and had been promoted to prep cook, asked her once what it was like to walk back into a kitchen after 8 years away. Irene thought about it. Like setting a table in a room that's been dark a long time, she said. You remember where everything goes. Your hands remember. But you have to stand there for a minute before you turn on the light. Because you know the room is going to be different, and you know you're going to be okay with that, and you want to have that moment of deciding before it gets bright. Tomas nodded like he understood. He was young enough that he did not yet know exactly what she meant and old enough to know he would. People still stopped Irene in the hotel lobby sometimes and asked about the hearing, about the footage, about what it felt like when Andre walked in. She always said the same thing. The hearing was never the point. For 11 years, a woman who had been one of the best in her field moved through rooms where no one asked her name. It took one man's cruelty and 60 seconds of public humiliation to make the world curious about someone that 60 seconds of basic decency would have revealed without any of it. Don't wait for the story to find out who's standing next to you. And here is what I keep coming back to. I'm telling you this because my mother worked housekeeping for 19 years at a hotel outside of Detroit. She had a nursing degree from the Philippines that this country wouldn't recognize, and she knew things about caring for people that the doctors who walked past her in the hallway could not have learned in a semester. She never complained. She just kept folding things in thirds and doing the work right. Somewhere in the hotel you are staying in, or the restaurant where you are eating, or the building where you go to work, there is a person carrying something extraordinary that no one has bothered to ask about. Tell us in the comments, have you ever been that person? Or have you walked past that person without stopping? Because the answer says something about all of us. And if this story stayed with you, pass it on to someone who feels like furniture in a room that doesn't see them. They might need to hear that worth doesn't come with a title. And subscribe, because we tell a new one of these every week. We're the final verdict, and we're just getting started.